Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience this morning. We're just having a couple of technical difficulties, but I'll just do the intros. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stella Glory. I'm delighted to welcome you all along to our first Vision Australia Library in Conversation event of 2022. It's lovely to see so many people tuned in from all over Australia, and I'm thrilled to welcome our very special guest, entrepreneur and adventurer Dick Smith, who will be in conversation today with the fantastic Sarah from the Vision Australia Library, and that's the name she's going by today, the fantastic Sarah. Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where we gather all over Australia, including the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose lands we are broadcasting from this morning. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Now for the housekeeping portion. Before we begin, just a little bit of housekeeping. We look forward to asking Dick some of your questions a little later in the session. So at any time during the session, please feel free to pop your questions in the chat and we'll get as many as time permits. If you are using Zoom with the screen reader, you can access the chat function using Alt-H. That's Alt-H for Harry. Please be aware comments and questions in the chat will be visible to all participants. And now, Sarah, am I introducing you?
You can, or I can introduce myself. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience this morning, and so lovely to have so many people along. This has far and away been our most registered for Zoom event, in conversation event, so fabulous to have everyone here. So I would like to introduce our very special guest. Dick Smith has been described by Paul Hogan as part Bear Grylls, part Bill Gates, but 100% Aussie larrikin. Known around the world as a gifted entrepreneur, an innovative marketer, and a fearless adventurer, Dick has recently released a book aptly titled My Adventurous Life. In the book, Dick chronicles some of his many adventures, both in the business world and also in his travels around the world. My Adventurous Life is available from our library in Daisy audio format. You can loan it by searching for the title or on our online library or in our app. But if you'd like us to give you any assistance in loaning this book, if you haven't already got your hands on it, then please get in touch with the library and I'll put all of our details at the end of our session today. Welcome, Dick, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be talking to you all. Great to be on air.
And whereabouts are you talking to us from today, Dick?
Yeah, I'm up at my house at Terry Hills, which is a northern Sydney suburb, right on the edge of the bush. So I absolutely love it here.
Oh, it sounds stunning. Did you have the crazy wild weather that Sydney was having?
Yeah, we've had a lot of rain, a tremendous amount of rain. The track I walk down each morning is covered in water, so that's pretty good.
Oh, nice. Well, we have so many questions to get to today. Obviously, we'd love to ask lots about your book, which I know I just devoured and I know a lot of our clients have already. So we've had lots of questions. There it is. I know I've got my copy here. Oh, it's not my thing. So for a lot of a lot of people have it in our audio, which is you yourself narrated. So I kind of did a hybrid. I listened and I also read the book so I could mark parts. But I really enjoyed hearing it literally in your own voice, and that's been our feedback from our clients as well. It's really like you are telling us your life story.
Wonderful.
So it's fabulous. So we have heaps of questions have come through already, and absolutely keep them coming, everyone. This one I liked first, just to set the scene. What have you been doing during the pandemic, Dick?
Well, believe it or not, I've been mainly sitting around at home, like most people, but haven't been able to get out too much. But last year, my wife and myself decided, after having flown around the world and flown around Australia many times, I thought we should drive around Australia. So we got a four-wheel drive and we drove from Sydney down to Melbourne and then across to Adelaide, across the Nullarbor Plain. And then last year we got from Perth to Darwin in June, just at the start of the lockup again. And so our vehicles parked up in a shed in Darwin, and we're waiting to go back when we're going to then head around the rest of Australia, across to Townsville and then down the coast. And we go via the back roads, all the dirt back roads. So we love, seeing everything we can of Australia.
Oh, wonderful. I was going to ask, how did you manage to dodge all of the border problems and everything? That's pretty impressive.
It was just so happened early last year that everything was open. We did it all officially and properly, but we were able to get. But once we got to June of last year, of course, we were locked up here in Sydney, so we couldn't get away.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. Good to hear you were able to get out for some adventures.
Yeah.
So tell us about writing this book. Why now? Why a book now? And what did your writing process look like for your book?
Yeah, it's interesting. The book, I've been thinking of a book for about 20 years, but I could never get around to it. But with the lockup, was it last year or the year before last? I got a bit mixed up. I think it was last year. I ended up being able to write the book. And I was sitting at home and sat at the computer here at my desk and started getting all the old material I'd got together from the very early days, because I'd had a go at writing a book about 20 years ago. I got all that and then updated it and finally produced the book, which sort of tells my life story. And I'm glad that I finished it.
Well done. I think a lot of people used COVID to kind of go for some creative pursuits and bake a lot of banana bread. So that's wonderful to hear that that's what you did with your time. And I guess kind of looking back on your life, it's been rich and it's been full. I wonder how you even start. Do you just start right at the beginning, or do you kind of pick out your favorite adventures and build out from there?
Yes, I did both. I started right from when I was a young kid and absolutely hopeless at school, as people will realise. And I never thought, I had a great inferiority complex when I was young. I thought I was a failure and all my friends were better at schoolwork, and I was hopeless at sport. And so I used to think, gee, my parents used to say to each other, whatever will happen to Dick. They were quite worried about me. But as the story tells, when I got in my early 20s and I started my little business, Dick Smith Electronics, with only $610. That's all I had. And I put in $600. My young fiance at the time, Pip, put in $10. And that started a business which one day would turn over $1 billion a year turnover. So it was a huge growth in the business when it was really successful.
Wow. I'm going to jump down the questions because one that came through from one of our clients really speaks to that point. You mentioned in your book, and quite honestly own the fact that you weren't an academic child, you didn't enjoy school particularly, and you found it really challenging. And one of our clients has asked, without academic prowess, what is the key quality that a person should develop for life and success?
Sarah, that's a really good question. And I cover it in the book, I hope, and that is to ask advice, surround yourself with capable people, and copy the success of others. And that's what I really did. I was really good at asking advice because I had no qualifications. And by the way, I suggest to everyone, you get as many qualifications as you can. I know as an employer, I always look at how many qualifications a person's got because that shows hard work. But if you're like me, I have no qualifications at all other than my Baden-Powell Scout Award, which I'm very proud of. But you can still do okay. And the formula is pretty simple. Ask advice, copy the success of others, and surround yourself with capable people. And that's really where I've got my success from. I've been able to motivate other capable people. So I got really good writers at Australian Geographic. With Dick Smith Electronics, I got really good electronics enthusiasts. So I made sure I got the best people to work with me, and that's why I was successful.
Great. And that really came through in the book, those three key kind of areas just to remember for success. I really thought were really powerful and applicable in so many ways, obviously with your business, but also just in planning your trips and your adventures, just to surround yourself with people that knew more about it than you, or kind of could bring you that expertise. Yep. Absolutely. Did anybody help you with this book? Did you get to call on anybody amazing to help you putting your book together? Yes.
I had three writers who helped me right from the very early days, and then mainly the editor of Australian Geographic, who I mentioned in the book, Howard Whalen. He basically helped me finish the book off, and he's a genius. He helped me in the days of Australian Geographic, and I had to write an editorial every 2 months, and I was absolutely hopeless at writing editorials. So I'd put down the points and he'd turn them into really good English. And that's where he helped me with the book. A lot of it's just, most people who read my book say, Dick, it reads just as you talk. And I said, well, that's because I put a lot of it just on tape and then we typed it up from there. But I'll put it into the computer from there. But Howard Whalen is the ex-editor of Australian Geographic. One of the main reasons for the success of AG, I always say, surround yourself with capable people. He was one of the best, and he helped me very much with the book. So that was fantastic.
Oh, amazing. Did you get any feedback about what you were like to write with?
Oh, well, he knew me very well because he'd been writing with me since the early Australian Geographic days. I can be a bit of a pain sometimes, but we got on really well together, and I'm very happy with the resultant book. In fact, they printed 40,000 copies originally, and then the publisher, Allen & Unwin, rang me up in a great big panic after it had been out a couple of weeks, and they said, quick, we have to print another 10,000 because it's selling out. So it looks as if they're going to sell about 50,000, and then I think eventually they're going to do a soft cover. So that'll be good.
Oh, lovely. And tell us for a moment about the process of putting your book into audio. It sounds like it actually started as an audio book in a way, because you were recording things and then it went to print, and now it's kind of gone full circle back to audio. How was that, sitting and reading in a studio?
Yeah, I was dreading that because I'm hopeless at reading, especially reading out loud. But they convinced me that I was going to get a professional actor to do the voice recording. But Allen & Unwin, the publisher, says, oh, no, people want to hear Dick Smith telling his story. And it was a lot of work. It took, I think, about 9 days, about 9 separate sessions. I went off to this place at North Sydney where they had a beautiful audio studio. Then I'd start reading, and they were really good. If I made a mistake, I could just stop and start again. And then they edited the audio for me. And so we finished the whole book. I think it was something like 8 or 9 days of different sessions. And I've listened to a bit of it myself, and I'm quite pleased with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly been the feedback we've received as well. It's just like, listening. Someone's written in that audio in Dick's voice makes the book even better. Absolutely.
Oh, that's good. Wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. So Vision Australia knows you quite well. You've always been a wonderful supporter of our service, and we're very grateful for that. Somebody asked the question, what has been your favourite and this is a hard word to say, philanthropic gift, and why?
Well, one of them, which it's applicable to this video too, is that I started giving money away when I was in the very early days of Australian Geographic. And what the story was, in the early days of Dick Smith Electronics. And my mother said to me years later that when I was a little boy, I said to her, what's a philanthropist? I couldn't say the word correctly. And she said, oh, that's someone who's done well, who gives money away. And it appears I said to my mum when I was quite young, well, if ever I do well, I'm going to become one of those. And when I got the original car radio business going, I did quite well. And one day a letter arrived, and it was from a Dr. Tony Kidman. And by the way, Dr. Tony Kidman is the dad of Nicole Kidman. Oh, there you go. And he wrote to me at my little Gore Hill radio shop and said, would I be able to help in the research for muscular dystrophy? They were researching into muscular dystrophy. And I donated, I think at the time, about $10,000, which was a lot of money for me. But I did it for one reason only, and that is that it gave me satisfaction. It made me, I was worried that I was doing very well, and there were lots of people who weren't doing so well. And so I thought I should share the money around. And so that was one of my most satisfactory donations. But let me tell you one, which is quite an exciting one. After a few years, I was doing quite well, and there was a big campaign on to try and save the southwest in Tasmania. And they were going to dam one of the magnificent rivers. And I thought I should be able to do something about this. So I decided to take a flight of journalists down to fly over this magnificent area so they could look out and see this wilderness, and it was going to be flooded by a huge dam and we were going to lose the wilderness area. Anyway, I was sitting in my office at Dick Smith Electronics and the phone rang, and this man called me and he said, oh, look, my name's John Dingle. He said, I want to come on the flight because he said, I want to try and save the Southwest. And I said, oh, well, that would be good. No, you can come as my guest. And he said, oh, by the way, I've got to tell you something. And I said, what? He said, I'm totally blind. He said, I can't see at all. And I said, well, that's incredible. He said, but look, being blind doesn't mean that I can't realise how important it is to keep beautiful wilderness areas. And so we took John Dingle. He actually owned his own engineering, a fitting and turning business. We took him on the plane down to Tasmania and we flew over. He had his friend who sat beside him describing what he was seeing, the magnificent area. And then John was interviewed by the media and he said, look, I might be blind, but I'm not blind to know that you should keep magnificent wilderness area. And that was one of the reasons that beautiful area ended up being saved. So that's one of the most satisfactory things I've been involved in.
Wow, that's such a beautiful connection and such a great reflection as well, that obviously visually it's such a beautiful space, but just to be in the presence of it and hear everything and sense it would still be so powerful.
And that's what John said, and that's why he was so powerful in communicating when people thought, well, if he's blind and he's going to go down there and protest and say we want to keep it, surely it's important that we try and save this beautiful area. I was down there a couple of weeks ago and it's all saved. It's still a magnificent area, so we're lucky to be involved in that.
Beautiful. That's amazing. Now, I know this from reading your book. Someone has asked, did anyone encourage you / mentor you along the way? And I know in your book you talk about so many people and really give them huge kudos for the effect that they had on their life. But is there somebody that you could talk about for a minute that really kind of had that impact on you, and how?
Oh, gee, it's so difficult. So many people. As I explained in my book, I surrounded myself with capable people. And, people gave me lots of business advice. Probably the most interesting person is the eccentric Dr. Tony Balthazar, who I mentioned in the book. And he was this eccentric doctor who was my scoutmaster. He was an anaesthetist, but he used to wear a monocle, which is a one-eyed sort of glass, and sometimes he'd answer you in French instead of English. So he's a bit strange. But he was the one who helped me in the early days, and then he loaned me the money to start Dick Smith Electronics. And he had the confidence in me to loan me that money, and that's what helped me get going. And he was a wonderfully interesting person, and that's where I've been very successful. I've had my success in life by surrounding myself with capable people, and he was one of them.
That's wonderful. I guess if we look on the flip side, how have you dealt with times when people have not been so encouraging, when you've had people that have actively tried to discourage you?
Yes, that's a great question. And I've had very little of that. People say, well, Dick Smith, you're a tall poppy. Surely you must have been cut down by the media from time to time. But I've had very little of that. Sometimes the media has said sort of nasty things about me, but I tend to ignore them. And generally speaking, I've been very fortunate. So I haven't really had that problem. The other thing is that when I was quite young, I had quite an inferiority complex, and I thought I was a failure because my friends had all gone off to university to get their electronics degrees and their engineering degrees, and I just wasn't capable academically. And so I thought I was a failure. But when I started to do okay in my own business, I realized, look, everyone's good at something. And this is a big message I've got to everyone who's listening. And that is that you can be good at something. Don't persevere with something that you're no good at. I've had friends of mine who have spent lots of time trying to do something that you think, hold on, you've got so many abilities in other fields. Why don't you concentrate on those? So what I say to people is, look, try and do what you're good at. And we're all good at something. And some of us may be no good at academically, but we can be good at practical things like I was. I was great at woodwork and metalwork at school, but no good at English or something like that. And but I did okay in the end.
Turned out all right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's really interesting because you reflect now, but also in your book about kind of that start in life and that inferiority complex of, why is everyone else doing university and this isn't the right fit for me? But did you have any idea as a child or in your early life what your life might actually look like?
No, that's a great question. I had absolutely no idea. I mean, for example, a large part of the book covers my aviation adventures, flying around the world 5 times altogether. And I can't believe I'm still alive because they were very risky flights. Plus, I did 2 balloon flights, one across Australia and one from New Zealand to Australia. And all of those have a lot of risk involved. And I'm amazed that I'm still alive. But if you had asked me when I was young, even when I started the business, that one day I'd be a record-breaking pilot, I wouldn't have believed you. I had no idea that I'd ever even be able to learn to fly, let alone go on record-breaking flights. And it was only when I made enough money in Dick Smith Electronics and a friend of mine said, oh, why don't you come out to Bankstown Airport and learn to fly? It's only, I think it was $25 an hour or something. And so I thought, oh, well, that sounds interesting. I might try that. And of course, I ended up loving flying and going on all these record-breaking flights, which I had no idea would ever happen. Yeah. The other thing is that I never thought I would be wealthy. In fact, when I was young, I used to look at wealthy people and think, oh, I don't really like those people. They should be sharing their wealth. And in those days, it was a lot better in Australia because all of the millionaires were also known as philanthropists. And they were in the paper because they gave their money away and helped people all the time. Now it's a bit different. We have a list of billionaires. We have over 100 billionaires in Australia, but only 15 of them, only 15% are known as philanthropists. And I just can't believe someone could be a billionaire without also being known as a philanthropist, because it's a responsibility. You should be helping other people at all times. I learned that in the Boy Scouts.
That's wonderful. And I think that really reflects certainly kind of growing up and seeing you as a public figure in that so much of it was attached to you being a businessman, but also being a philanthropist. And I'm still struggling with that word. But it's really nice that I guess that you can be known for that. And that's such a wonderful thing. And when people talk about you, I know I spoke to a lot of people ahead of this interview to see if they had any questions, and people really know you for that, which is really wonderful. I just had some lovely feedback in our chat from someone talking about, growing up and not having that academic prowess. One of our clients, one of my colleagues says the Dick Smith electronic kits and manuals have had a big impact on kids like me.
Isn't that wonderful? In fact, I get stopped sometimes. I'm walking down the street and a person will stop me and they'll say, Dick Smith, oh, let me shake your hand. I got into electronics. I've now got a PhD in rocket engineering. And I got into electronics through your Funway kits. And some people will remember that when I started Dick Smith Electronics in the early days, we had these little books called Funway into Electronics, and they were so beginners could get into electronics. And it's amazing the number of people who got into electronics through those Funway kits and then went on and got university degrees and PhDs and all the qualifications you can believe in.
That's amazing. And when you look back at your achievements and you get feedback like that, where does feedback like that sit with you when you kind of ranking all the things you're proud of in your life?
Oh, that makes me feel really, really good. And the fact that I was so hopeless academically and couldn't get any qualifications makes me feel doubly proud when I think, well, those books I bought out on electronics ended up starting careers for many other people who could get the qualifications and could go on and obviously doing great things for Australia. So I'm very proud to have been involved in that, even though at the time I had no idea. I did the Funway to Electronics books and the kits purely as money-making exercise for Dick Smith Electronics. It was to try and cover the overhead so we could pay the wages and do okay.
Wonderful. I don't know the answer to this one, so I'm very keen to hear yours. Someone has asked, have any of your inventions assisted the vision impaired community?
No, look, I'd love to be able to say they have, but as far as I know, none of my I haven't invented many things myself, actually. It's pretty hard to invent things, but I'm hoping that those Funway kits and getting people into electronics has ended up getting people who become engineers and then have got some fantastic inventions. But I don't have any feedback on that to be able to lay any claim from myself.
There's still time, I think.
Yes.
So this is a big question. What do you feel has been your biggest challenge?
My biggest challenge was trying to do aviation reform. I got involved in the government and I wanted Australia to be a leader in the world in what we call general aviation. That's all the small planes. And I basically failed at that. The bureaucracy sort of got the better of me. And I put in my book, I said, working in the Canberra bureaucracy made me realise why the Soviet Union collapsed, because it was a huge bureaucracy and I just basically couldn't. I wanted us to use that formula of copying the best from overseas, which is what I used in business. But it was very hard to get a large bureaucracy to do that, and I basically failed in doing those reforms. And that means that whereas we could be leaders in the world in flight training and have people coming from all around the world to learn to fly here because the weather's so good and the terrain is low and we don't have snow and ice most of the time, unfortunately that didn't happen. So that's been my failure, not being able to finish the aviation reforms.
There's a question that's just come through and it's really interesting. So someone has asked, so does dyslexia inhibit reading aircraft instrumentation? So I don't know whether whether you have dyslexia, but you mentioned kind of a lack of academic prowess. Did you ever find, as you became an adventurer and learned how to, use these machines, that inhibited that in any way?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because some people say I'm dyslexic. When they read the book, they say, Dick, you're dyslexic, but I've never been tested, see?
Okay.
So I don't really know. But it did have, well, in flying, to do your instrument rating, which means that allows you to fly in cloud, you have to learn Morse code. Morse code was an old-fashioned way of communicating, and I had great difficulty because of my learning difficulties, probably from dyslexia. I couldn't learn the Morse code. And you had to learn things like in aviation, A is Alpha, B is Bravo, C is Charlie. There's a word that you say that means what's the first letter. And I had problems even in learning that. So, yes, it did make it hard for me. And initially, when I learned to fly, it was quite a few years before I got my instrument rating so I could fly in cloud. And fortunately, on the last section of my around the world flight in my helicopter, when I had to land on a ship in the Northern Pacific to get refueled, and that's all in the book, and I had to fly in very bad weather. And by then, I'd somehow overcome my dyslexia and learnt to fly and learnt the Morse code and learnt to fly on instruments. But I found it very hard to do.
Yeah, okay, that's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
There you go. So somebody has asked, particularly thinking about kind of more your adventures and your amazing records that you've broken, what do you think are the special qualities that you have to have kind of done all these things? And they've also said, and perhaps your comment about other adventurers. So I know you speak in the book about especially aviation, historical aviation people, I've lost the word, sorry, and people that set previous records and your real admiration for them. What do you think special about those people that you've held up as heroes as well?
Well, yes, it's interesting. And the main thing, I'm still alive, which I'm quite amazed in a way that after 5 flights around the world and the 2 balloon flights that I got into very many risky situations, and you'll read about some of those in the book, but or listen to some of those in the book, but it's quite interesting to me that how did I get away with it? One of the reasons I didn't keep pushing the flights, all of my heroes, people like Sir Charles Kingsford Smith, Ulm, Bert Hinkler, they all lost their lives because they kept pushing the risk boundaries too much. And first of all, one of the reasons I'm alive is that I could use the most modern and safest aircraft, and aircraft are a lot safer these days. I relied on my life on that little single engine inside the helicopter. And if it had stopped operating when I was halfway across the Atlantic Ocean, I probably wouldn't be here now. So luckily, modern equipment is so much more reliable than the equipment in the 1920s and 30s that was used by my aviation heroes. So also, I think there's a lot of luck. Also, I call myself a responsible risk taker. And you'll hear in the book that I was going to try and fly my helicopter from the North Pole to the South Pole. But when I got to the North Pole, it was so difficult and I had so many problems and I nearly lost my life that I decided I'd change that route from a helicopter to using a twin otter aircraft, which is a twin engine plane. And I ended up going pole to pole, in fact, right around the world in the twin engine plane. Why didn't I do it in the helicopter? Well, I decided it was too risky and I'm now alive.
I'm certainly reading about the North Pole and your attempts to land there. And, I'm sitting at home in Melbourne reading that going, oh my goodness. But I love that, as you reflected, you knew when to take the risks and when to pull back. But a couple of times you mentioned you'd get home and then you'd get this little niggle of, nope, I've got to go again. Is that what it feels like, that you have this sense of like this adventure need for adventure building?
Yes. Yeah, look, I must admit it's adrenaline, it's a drug, and that risk-taking, I call it responsible risk-taking. I hope that it is responsible risk-taking, and the fact that I'm still here shows that so far it has been. But yes, and I look and think everything that can go wrong. And I remember when I flew around the world in the helicopter, the Soviet Union existed and you couldn't land in Russia, and you can't get a helicopter across the Pacific Ocean without a landing somewhere. So I decided to land on board a ship. that I'd put 3 drums of fuel on, and that ship was halfway between Japan and Alaska. And it's a long way. It was further than flying from Australia to New Zealand by helicopter. And of course, as most people understand, helicopters are only designed for short distances. But I put in extra tanks and managed to take off and flew all the way and landed there on that ship that's rolling around in the ocean and managed to refuel. And that was one of the riskiest things I've done. And I always call myself a responsible risk taker, but I was lucky to get away with that one.
Absolutely. I think reading all these adventures, I was thinking, oh my goodness. And then on the other hand, I'm thinking, how is Pip going at home? Because obviously family is such a huge part of your life, like really the biggest. And so many times through the book, you reflect that you wanted to ensure that things didn't encroach on your family time, that the business wasn't too big because you wanted to have adventures with your daughters and with Pip. Yeah. So how did you know, I guess, enough was enough at times when you did decide to pull back and focus more on family?
Yes, I think because so many successful business men and women I know tell me how they regret one thing when they built their business up, they didn't see much of their family. And I've never had that regret because, as people will read or hear in the book, I was very much involved with my family the whole time. I took them with me everywhere, even on the flight around the world. They'd meet me in England, and when I landed at Balmoral Castle to be met by Prince Charles, well, Pip and the girls were there. And so they were always involved. And one of the reasons I didn't keep expanding Dick Smith Electronics, the reason I sold it to Woolworths, and the reason also I sold Australian Geographic, is I never wanted to be in a situation where I couldn't put my family first. And it was, I must admit, for quite selfish reasons. I just love being with my wife and my kids. And growing up with them, we always had breakfast together and we always had dinner together. And we'd discuss what had happened during the day. And I just made sure I was always around and there. And it's the best thing I've ever done because our girls have turned out okay. And we've now got grandchildren and they're doing the same thing, involved with their kids as well, which is so important.
That's such a beautiful reflection. And I really felt that throughout the whole book, that was that emphasis beyond anything else on family. What would you do if one of your grandchildren turned around and decided to do some madcap aeronautics and set some records? How would you go?
I wouldn't like it. I wouldn't like it. In fact, you know, this is how wonderful my wife Pip has been, because she supported me in those adventures. And I must admit, if it had been reversed and my wife had said, I'm going to go and fly around the world in a helicopter, I'd say, there's no way you're going to do that. You won't come home. But she was just fantastic. And she knew that I had this spirit of adventure right from when we first met. And so she supported me. But she did tell me one thing. She said, Dick, when you did the first flight around the world by helicopter, she said, I thought that would get it out of your system. I didn't know you were going to continue on adventures. And of course, that's what I've done. But now I'm 77 years of age now, and I've stopped adventuring other than driving around Australia in the 4-wheel drive. That's a pretty good adventure for these days.
That's an amazing adventure. And I think COVID has taught us all the value of travel. When you're stuck at home, you miss our big, wide country very much.
Definitely. And also, look, I've traveled, I've been to over 200 countries in this world, and I've done 5 flights around the world, but there's no country as fantastic as Australia, and especially the outback. And anyone who gets a chance to get to the outback, it's just a wonderful place. And just staying at the local country motel, or we just camp with our swag beside an open fire, and we go by the back tracks, the dirt roads, and it's just a wonderful country. We're so fortunate.
We really are. I had the privilege of growing up in Alice Springs, and I'm always very proud to say I came from there because it's such an amazing part of the world. And I know you've spent a lot of time up in, a bit hot, but in that part of the world. Someone has asked, and it kind of leads on from this, what would you still like to achieve?
What would I still like to achieve? Oh, well, as I mentioned, I'd love to finish the aviation reform, which I failed at. But otherwise, look, I'm pretty contented. I've been very lucky. I'd like Australia to have a population plan. At the moment, we have 25 million, and if we keep expanding, we could end up with 100 million people here at the end of this century when my grandkids will still be alive. And not many people think that's a sensible number. And to me, I think the number we've got now, or maybe 30 million, would be as many as we want. It's a dry, arid country. We can fit people here, but they'll all be living in high-rise like termites, and the kids would be in high-rise schools like they have in Hong Kong and Shanghai. And one of the beautiful things about Australia is we have a lot of area and not too many people. And I've sort of had this campaign that said, let's have a population plan. Every Aussie family has a population plan. They can have 20 children, but none do. People have the number of kids they can give a good life to. And I reckon as a country, we should work out what's the number of people we can give a good life to and then harmonise and level off. One of the problems is the capitalism that I've done so well out of requires endless growth. But that's impossible. You can't have endless growth. One day you have to live in balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think you've got another book in you?
No, that's the hard work doing that book. I don't think there's another book. I did write a book previously about population and that we should have a population plan, and that did well. And then I've written some electronics books like the Funway kits. And then on my flights around the world, I wrote different books. And if anyone's interested, they're on my website. It's called Dick Smith Adventure, all one word. You just key that into Google. And so you can see the documentaries I made, but also the other books I did on my around the world flights.
Oh, wonderful. So Dick Smith documentary. No worries.
Yeah, no, it's called Dick Smith Adventure, all
Adventure,
one word.
Sorry.
Dick Smith
Absolutely.
Adventure. Yep.
I'd just like to share a lovely piece of feedback that's come through. So somebody says that they often speed up the audiobook to get through it quickly. But the way that your book was narrated was so compelling that I decided very early on to give up the efficiency thing and simply enjoy the authenticity. So thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I hadn't realised that. They had to really convince me to do the audio book because I wanted to get a proper actor. I said, you've got to have a proper actor to do this. And they said, no, Dick, you'll be okay. And I'm really glad I did it.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely been the feedback we've had. And this, so that was Francois said that. I hope I'm saying that right. And he has asked about your activism with the Gordon below Franklin Dam, which you noted, and also your association with John Dingle, who himself is vision impaired. Is that how your association with Vision Australia came about?
I think so. I mean, that probably would have been the start of it, but I've tried to help with charitable giving. I do that for the satisfaction I can get out of it. I consider it an obligation. If you've done well, you have an obligation to give back and help people. I learned that through the Scouts, as a cub, help other people at all times. That we were told to do. It was part of the Scout law, in fact. And I try and spread our gifting around to lots of different causes. And Vision Australia is one important one, but there's just so many different causes that we've helped over the years, and we're very happy that we've been able to do that.
Absolutely. So we've got some camping questions now. So Bronnie asks, do you overnight in a caravan, a tent or a motel?
It's a bit of each, but normally I just lie out in my swag. We have a little camper van. It's quite small. And sometimes we stay at motels because we love Aussie motels. They're so fantastic. But other times I just lie in my swag. I've got a blow-up mattress type thing, and then I lie in my sleeping bag and I look at the stars at night and lie beside the fire, and I absolutely love it. And just recently, last year, as we drove across the Nullarbor Plain, we took a short cut and drove across, I've forgotten the name of the mountain range, but it was very rugged, and we stopped at this Mount Evo station, I think it was called, and we went out and got a bit of wood and lit our little fire and just sat around the campfire, and it was just absolutely fantastic looking at those stars at night. The stars at night in Australia are the best stars ever because there's so little air pollution. In the other countries I've been to at night, you can hardly see the stars, so we're so lucky here.
Agreed. Yeah, they don't even look real, do they? They're just ridiculously stunning.
Absolutely fantastic. There's a lot of them out there too.
Yes, for sure. You speak a lot in your book about the Scouts and the impact that they had on you, not only in your young kind of formative years, but in your adult life. And Graham's asked, Graham has been a Scout leader himself for more than 50 years. He's asked, why do you believe Scouting is the world's best program for young people?
Yes. I've said in my book that I consider it's the best training organisation for young people in the world. And I just know it is. And the incredible thing is that the Scout leaders are voluntary, of course, so they give their time. And in my particular day, our group Scout master was a businessman who ran his own business with about 30 employees and did really well, but came and gave his knowledge and his skills to Scouts for nothing. And so I've encouraged my grandkids to get into Scouts, and I tell everyone it's the best youth training organisation in the world. And I often wonder, where did I learn to be able to show the leadership that was necessary in starting Dick Smith Electronics, Australian Geographic and Dick Smith Foods? And I learnt that from the Scouts. And so I really think it's the most fantastic movement. And anyone who's a Scout leader, I admire you. I was an assistant Cub Master for a few years, and I just thank you for putting so much work into helping young Australians.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've received a few accolades over the years, just a couple. The question here, you were awarded Australian of the Year in 1986 and then appointed an Officer of the Order of Australia in 1999, which was advanced to a Companion of the Order of Australia in 2015. Someone's got their facts very straight. Which of these awards are you most proud of and why?
Without doubt, the Australian of the Year. I was incredibly proud to receive that. That's something which is... there's only one a year. And at the time, I was working on something quite interesting. Of course, I was growing Dick Smith Electronics, but I'd found that young people, especially young girls in their 15 and 16 years of age, about 30% smoked. And we all know the dangers of smoking, just terrible. And so I got involved with the Reverend Ted Noffs of the Wayside Chapel, and he had the wonderful life education movement that he was starting. There's now life education. Most kids will remember Harold, the friendly Harold, and the life education movement. And at that time, it's one of the most satisfactory things I've been involved in. It was right when I was Australian of the Year. The cigarette companies were running advertisements in women's magazines and all magazines selling cigarettes and showing beautiful young girls sitting on a park bench with their boyfriend and both holding a cigarette at each other's mouth. I remember it used to say, Peter Jackson, 25s, you're laughing. Oh. And the whole impression was to get young girls into smoking. And I was just outraged because with life education, we're explaining to young people the risks of all type of drugs, including legal drugs like cigarettes. And so I worked for 2 years after I was appointed Australian of the Year, and eventually we got the cigarette advertisements completely banned, which was just a really good thing. And I'm happy to say that there's been a huge drop-off in the number of young people, especially young girls, smoking, and that's very important for their health.
Yeah, amazing. I remember Harold very well from my school days. I hadn't realised the connection until I read your book, actually.
Yeah, that's right. And it's Healthy Harold. Healthy Harold. That's
Healthy Harold. Yes,
Healthy Harold,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Is he still around?
Yeah. There's 96 life education vans, I think, and they're educating people all around, young kids in schools all around Australia. So the life education movement and Healthy Harold is absolutely booming, and I still donate to it every year.
Oh, amazing. I have to ask my kids if they've been. That's wonderful to hear it's still going. Yeah. For sure. So we've only got about 15 minutes left. So I'll just say for anybody, if you have a question, please pop it in the chat now, just so we can try and get to it. But Dick, this might be a hard one to answer. What is your most favourite place to visit or travel to?
Oh, right. No, it's not that hard. My most favourite place, other than Kalyamurra Waterhole it's in Coopers Creek, where Burke and Wills lost their lives. It's between Queensland and South Australia, and it's called Coopers Creek, and it's called Kalyamurra Waterhole, which is this lovely waterhole in the creek. It's outback Australia, outback northern South Australia, and it has the most wonderful river red gums leaning over the pool. It's an everlasting waterhole, and it has corellas in the trees, the beautiful little Australian corellas, and it's one of my favourite places. Internationally, my favourite place is Antarctica, and if ever you get a chance, Antarctica is a wonderful place to go to. It's an ultimate sort of wilderness, and the wonderful thing about the animal life in Antarctica is that they're pretty well tame, because there were no human beings in Antarctica for literally millions of years, that the animal life, especially the penguins, you can sit on a rock shelf, and after a while all these penguins will be all sitting around you chortling to each other. And so other than Australia, my favourite place in the world is Antarctica.
Is that somewhere that you get to go back to very often?
No, I've been there about 3 or 4 times, and in my flight around the world, the vertical flight, which I cover in my book, I spent 5 weeks in Antarctica. And it was just a most incredible experience. So it is an extraordinary place. And so far, we'd love it to become a world national park. So far, there's no mining and it's not being exploited, mainly just for scientific work, which is good.
Amazing. Yeah, hopefully it stays that way. That's wonderful. So this question's come through. I thought it was a really interesting one. What is the human quality that sustains you?
The human quality, I think, is to be kind. My mother, as most mothers are, was a very kind person, and she always said, be kind. And there's a famous radio announcer who used to sign off by saying, be kind to each other. And I think being kind is the most important thing, and doing unto others as you'd like them to do to you. Is that the way? I've probably got it around the wrong way.
You've got it?
Yeah. And I think they are important things. And I think it's important to be kind to people, and most important.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful. So I'm just reading through some of the questions. Oh, here's one. We don't have a name for this person, but they've asked, how did you personally navigate or inspire and motivate yourself regarding your inferiority complex? And they've noted, as I suffer from that as a musician who having suffered a stroke.
Yes, right. Well, in my particular case, it's sort of, I developed the confidence when I was about 25, when my accountant said to me, oh, you're doing quite well in business. And I'd started my little car radio servicing and two-way radio servicing business with $610. And I just worked really hard and put all the money back in. And one day he said, oh, look, you're doing quite well. And I said, what do you mean I'm doing quite well? I don't have any money. And he said, oh, well, you've paid your tax and you've got more stock, and explained to me that I was doing okay. And so that started to give me the self-confidence that maybe I was good at something. And so my suggestion to anyone is try and concentrate on what you're good at. And we're all good at something. But I remember some really good advice I got when I was quite young, and I wanted to learn to play the saxophone. And so I bought myself a saxophone, and I went to a musician who taught me how to play the saxophone. And after about 6 months, he said something to me. He said, Dick, can I give you some advice? And I said, yes, thank you. And he said, look, Dick, you'll never be able to play the saxophone. And what he was explaining to me was I didn't have that musical bone in my body that was really necessary. And it was actually kind that he did that, because I would have persevered for years and years to try and do this. But he said to me, he said, Dick, you'll be good at something. There's lots of different things you can be good at, but you're just not musical. And I thought that was good advice. And so my suggestion to everyone is do what you're good at. But quite often, here's an interesting thing. Quite often, the thing you're good at is the hardest thing. It requires the most work. So you've got to make sure that you're not squibbing out because it's a lot of hard work. So try and do what you think you're good at, because we're all good at something. And then that's the way I got over my inferiority complex.
That's great advice. Absolutely. I remember somebody saying to me that if you're good at something, it gives you energy. And that was a really great way to identify, even if it's hard, like you've noted, but if you're energized and excited by that thing, then that's probably something you're pretty good at.
Yeah, it sounds precisely right. Definitely.
If we can hone those skills, absolutely, for sure. I wanted to ask about stories, seeing as we are a library and your story is what's brought us here today. Have there ever been, I guess, growing up or throughout your life, stories? It could be books, it could be stories you've heard, in another format that have impacted you and I guess changed your life or.
Yes, not so much changed my life. I mean, I loved Rudyard Kipling, who was the Mowgli, and that's through the Cubs and the Scouts. And I loved reading his book. My favourite book as a young person was The Count of Monte Cristo, because it starts off with a sad story, but it ends up being happy in the end, and he succeeds, even though people did terrible things to him. And I think that goes back to fairness and being kind to people. So that was my favourite book as a young person, and I've since reread it. It's very long to read, but it's called The Count of Monte Cristo, and it's a fascinating book. But I'm just trying to think what else books have had effects on me. I love reading, and I mainly read non-fiction, and I love hearing about other people's lives and their stories and so forth. And that's why I've tried to make my book as interesting as possible, similar to the books that I love reading.
Yeah, wonderful. And that's actually a question I ask everybody when we do these interviews. What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book by Len Bedell. Now, Len Bedell, across Australia, across the deserts, we have something called the Gun Barrel Highway, which is this road that's gun barrel straight, and it was put in by a bulldozer and a grader in about the 1950s by Len Bedell. And I'm reading his book about putting in these incredible roads across the remote areas of Australia. What else have I been reading? Gee, I can't remember. Aren't I terrible? I can't remember what I'm reading.
No, it's always good to read, I guess, people's personal stories and
Yes.
Yeah, much like your book, I think it's relatable, and especially kind of being Australian, and for many of us, you've been a public figure in our lives. So to kind of have your personal reflections.
Yeah, and I
really
think
nice.
the message in my book is you can be pretty hopeless, which I was, and I think anyone who reads my book will think, gee, he was pretty hopeless as a school kid, but you can do okay in the end. And Australia is one of the best countries in the world for doing that. I mean, we're very fortunate people. And as I said in the book, I'd never say we're the best country in the world. Everyone says that about their countries, but we're one of the best, and we're very fortunate people.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. We've had from Barbara, it's not a question, just a request. Can you organise some bush trips for women of all ages? I think I would probably sign up for that. That would be a lot of fun.
Right, yeah, well, look at Australian Geographic magazine. I no longer own it, but they're running along, and they have some fantastic trips that they organise, going out back and so forth. Looks quite fantastic when I look at the magazine.
Yeah, I bet. So I know you noted you've got your car up in Darwin, but where's your next trip to? Will it be to get that back, or?
Yes, yeah. The next trip we're planning to go up hopefully in April after the wet season, and we're going to try and drive along the Gulf of Carpentaria, and that's on the dirt road, not down through Mount Isa on the bitumen, but up on the dirt road, the back road, and we're going to try and hope to get through there, through to Townsville, and then come down the coast to Sydney. So that will happen in April. At the moment, we left the vehicle there in June of last year, but then when we finally got approval to get to Darwin, it's the wet season and you can't get on the roads. They're just a quagmire, even though we've got a four-wheel drive. And so we're hoping that April will be okay.
Well, good luck. Hopefully that works out. And what does your road trip look like? Is there a soundtrack? Is there an audio book? What are we going to be hearing on these long trips?
Oh, no, I don't. Unfortunately, I don't do anything. But I listen a lot, and I'll appear on Australia All Over. That's Macca on the ABC on Sunday mornings. I'm sure lots of people listen to Macca. And so when I get out on the road, I ring up Macca and I say where I am and what I'm doing. So my suggestion is listen to Macca on the ABC on Sunday mornings, and you'll know what I'm doing.
Wonderful. There you go. Great tip. Well, Dick, thank you so much. I knew the hour would go so quick, and it has. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time this morning, and also just in your book and all of your insights. I know that I certainly appreciated it. I'm seeing lots of things come through the chat. Everyone's just saying thank you so much for your time today. As we've noted, your book is available in our library, and we'd love everybody that hasn't listened to it already to have a listen. It's about 8 hours. It's in Dick's own voice, and you can hear about all these crazy adventures and wonderful insights into such an interesting life. But yeah, well, thank you so much. Enjoy your rest of your day and all the adventures to come.
Thanks, Sarah. And it was wonderful to be talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. We'll close off our webinar now.
Vision Australia.
Blindness, low vision, opportunity.
Vision Australia logo. 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.